Following the Denver Nuggets' 2023 NBA title victory, one thing was certain. For the first time in almost 20 years, there is parity in the NBA. We all remember those years where it was almost guaranteed to be the Cavaliers and Warriors matching up in the NBA Finals. But since 2019, a different franchise has won the NBA title. And entering the 2023-2024 season, the trend looked to continue, as while the reigning champions still had the best player in the world, new contenders were starting to emerge, and some familiar faces made game-changing trades that would put them head and shoulders above the competition. But how would all this shake out? Join me today as we go through the NBA in 2024, a year in review. But before we get started, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel as we're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Any and all support would be greatly appreciated and help show me that you guys like these kinds of videos. So remember to like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into the video. The NBA season started on October 24th, 2023, with the Lakers traveling to Denver for a Western Conference Finals rematch, and the Phoenix Suns taking on the Golden State Warriors in a battle of two veteran-led teams with high expectations. In the first matchup, the Nuggets took care of business after grabbing a 14-point lead in the first quarter, and in the second matchup, it was the Phoenix Suns who came back from an 8-point deficit entering the fourth quarter who grabbed the victory. Other notable results from October saw two young teams in the Pistons and the Thunder jump out to a 2-1 and 3-1 start respectively. And after 1 week of play on November 1st, only 3 teams were left undefeated: the Denver Nuggets, the Luka and Kyrie-led Dallas Mavericks, and the Boston Celtics, a team many considered to be the Eastern Conference favorite after acquiring Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday. But postseason conversations quickly took a back seat, as on Friday, November 3rd, the first in-season tournament game took place. The in-season tournament was introduced with games every Tuesday and Friday, counting towards a team's record. There were 3 groups per conference, with the winner of each group, and 1 wildcard spot per conference, advancing to the quarterfinals. In the Eastern Conference, almost every favorite in every division advanced, as the Bucks would take on the Knicks and the Celtics would take on the Pacers. But out west, the Lakers would face the Suns and the Kings would face the Pelicans. That meant that at that time, the top 3 seeds in the Western Conference did not make the quarterfinals. But still, the Lakers dominated the Suns and Pelicans in the quarterfinals and semifinals respectively, and took on the Pacers in the finals, who shockingly defeated the Celtics and Bucks to advance. And after a dominant performance defensively, the Los Angeles Lakers would be crowned the first ever in-season tournament champs, with LeBron James being named in-season tournament MVP. But as the in-season tournament was going on in November, we had some major standings updates. As I mentioned before, no top 3 seed out west made the in-season tournament quarterfinals. And to start December, it was Minnesota on top of the West with a 14-4 record. Many people, including myself, doubted the Timberwolves entering the season after a lackluster previous season headlined by struggles defensively and constant injuries. But with the rotation healthy and Rudy Gobert playing at the Defensive Player of the Year level Minnesota traded for, the Timberwolves held a lead over the second seed Nuggets. Another team out west that was surprising at this time was the Thunder, as while many expected them to fall within the 5 to 8 seed range, they are playing above their expectations thanks to Chet Holmgren, the second overall pick in 2022 playing his first official NBA season, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was in MVP conversations at just 25 years old. Meanwhile out east, the Orlando Magic was a surprise team so far through the season, as at 14-5, they sat at the 2 seed because of Paolo Banchero, whose sophomore leap helped him get into All-NBA conversations. But throughout the month of December, Orlando struggled through a 5-8 stretch, falling to the 5th seed by December 31st, and it was the 76ers who took their place after going 10-3 in December. And it was mostly in part to Joel Embiid, whose dominance from the year prior translated over to help Embiid, if healthy, lock up the MVP award before January hit. But above the 76ers stood the Celtics, who had the league's best record at 26-6, and the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that, after acquiring Damian Lillard in the offseason, had some growing pains to go through, especially defensively, as while their record was 24-8 heading into January, they clearly had some work to do before competing for a title. And while all of this was happening out east, the Western Conference saw the emergence of a new contender in the Los Angeles Clippers, as after trading for James Harden at the end of October, the Clippers finally found their groove in December, going from 8-10 in the 11th seed on the 1st to 19-12 in the 4th seed on the 31st. But as the Clippers were gaining momentum, LA's other team was struggling, as after winning the in-season tournament and climbing all the way to the 4th seed, the Lakers finished December at 17-17 in the 9th seed. And shockingly below the Lakers sat the Golden State Warriors, who after starting with 4 wins and 1 loss in November, were now sitting with 15 wins and 17 losses heading into January. But the biggest story of the month didn't have to do with any team at the top of the standings, or any team even close to playoff contention. No, it dealt with the Detroit Pistons, a team that hadn't won in the entire month of November, and went into their game on December 30th against the Toronto Raptors on a 28-game losing streak. But thankfully for the Pistons, the Raptors just completed the OG Anunoby trade hours earlier, meaning the Raptors would be without their star forward or Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. And though the Raptors fought hard, it was the Pistons who came out on top in a 2-point victory that snapped the longest losing streak in NBA history. The Pistons would try to right their wrongs entering the new year, and while they were much better by the end of the season, they would ultimately fall 1 game behind Washington and finish last place in the Eastern Conference for the 2nd year in a row. A team that did end up righting their wrongs from the previous year was the Cleveland Cavaliers, as without Darius Garland and Evan Mobley for an extended period of time, the Cavaliers went on a huge streak, winning 11 games and losing only 1 in the month of January to climb all the way to the 2nd seed in the Eastern Conference by the All-Star break. A similar streak of success came from the Los Angeles Clippers, who took the momentum created in December into the new year by going 11-3 in January and even climbing to the 1st seed out west on February 6th. But in the midst of all this, the Milwaukee Bucks decided to fire head coach Adrian Griffin after leading Milwaukee to a 30-13 record near the end of January. This firing, while unshocking due to the Bucks' poor play on the court and coaching disputes before the season started, was completely unexpected, especially considering the timing of it all. Many expected Griffin to at least last the entirety of the season, but the Bucks pulled the plug early and hired Doc Rivers in his place. An eventful January closed with another piece of big news, as Joel Embiid, who as I previously mentioned was the runaway MVP frontrunner, suffered a knee injury on January 31st in a game against the Warriors that would ultimately make him miss the majority of the regular season. And as a result, the 76ers, a team that sat in the top 3 of the Eastern Conference for the majority of the season, would start to fall down the standings and sit at the 5th seed when the All-Star break came around. And after a disappointing weekend that saw Damian Lillard win the 3-point contest, Mac McClung win his 2nd dunk contest, and Team East defeat Team West, we finally got back into the regular season action. But by this time in the season, the top 3 seeds were practically decided, at least out west, as with Minnesota, Denver, and Oklahoma City all continuing their dominance from the early season, the most intriguing part of the last 30 games of the regular season dealt with play-in teams, as with Phoenix, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Houston, Dallas, and Golden State all in danger of potentially being out of the top 8, things got heated down the stretch. The same couldn't be said for the Eastern Conference, as outside of some minor seeding changes that saw the Knicks jump to the 2 seed and the Cavaliers fall to the 4 seed, and an injury to Giannis Antetokounmpo that wouldn't affect the Bucks seeding, but changed their first-round playoff series against the Pacers, the 10 teams playing postseason basketball out east were pretty much set in stone. So with the Eastern Conference locked up, we're going to focus our attention to the Western Conference. And it was there that the Dallas Mavericks were quietly starting to click and go on some nice winning streaks, and by the end of the season, they would capture 50 wins in the 5th seed. And they would be leapfrogging multiple teams by the end of March, most notably the Sacramento Kings, who started falling off a cliff following the injuries to Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk. Joining them in the collapse that almost ended terribly was the Phoenix Suns, who never found their groove on both sides of the ball, but somehow found their way to 49 wins in the 6th seed. So with the top 6 seeds locked up, it was now time for teams to lock in their positioning for the play-in tournament. And despite the Pelicans stumbling towards the finish line and the Lakers finishing the season strong, it would be the Pelicans who secured the 7th seed and the Lakers would grab the 8th seed. And as for the 9th and 10th seeds, it would be the Kings and the Warriors who took those final spots, with Houston finishing a couple games out of that final spot. So with that, the play-in tournament was set, and while the Eastern Conference was fairly uninteresting, with the 76ers defeating the Heat in the 7-8 matchup, and the Bulls taking down the Hawks in the 9-10 matchup before losing to the Heat in the final play-in game, the Western Conference was full of surprises, with the Lakers beating the Pelicans in New Orleans, and the Golden State Warriors getting smoked by the Kings. Yes, the 2022 NBA champions would be missing the playoffs for the third time in 5 years by losing to a team riddled with injuries. But the injured Kings' run would end there at the hands of the Pelicans, and with that, the NBA playoffs would be set from seeds 1 to 8. But right before we get into the NBA playoffs, we have to talk about the yearly awards. After Joel Embiid's injury, the MVP race was down to two men, Nikola Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But it was ultimately Jokic who took home the yearly award for the third time in 4 years. Then, in the Rookie of the Year award race, it was all but decided by January that Victor Wembanyama would be the runaway pick, and rightfully so. Wembanyama had one of the best rookie seasons in recent memory, and has all the potential in the world to become one of the greatest basketball players we've ever seen. But he would ultimately fall short in the Defensive Player of the Year award race, losing to fellow Frenchman Rudy Gobert, who won his record-tying fourth award. The Sixth Man of the Year award race was almost certainly going to go to Malik Monk, but shockingly, Naz Reid stole the award because of his stellar performance in the final weeks of the season. And finally, the Most Improved Player award went to Tyrese Maxey, who stepped up big time after James Harden was traded and when Joel Embiid went down with his injury. So with that, now we head into the NBA playoffs, and the three series that many were looking forward to the most were the 6th-seeded Suns taking on the 3rd-seed Timberwolves, the 2nd-seeded Knicks, who lost Julius Randle for the season just months prior, versus the 7th-seeded 76ers, who just got Joel Embiid back at the end of the regular season, and a Western Conference Finals rematch from the year prior, with the 7th-seeded Lakers taking on the 2nd-seeded Nuggets. And while the Timberwolves dominated the Suns and swept them, and the Nuggets took down the Lakers in entertaining fashion, the best first-round series of the playoffs was far and away the Sixers and Knicks series, headlined by massive fourth-quarter comebacks and star performances from Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Jalen Brunson. But when the dust settled, it was the higher-seeded Knicks who came out on top, beating the Sixers in 6 games, and moving on to the second round to take on the Indiana Pacers, who upset the 3rd-seeded Milwaukee Bucks, who were without Giannis and Damian Lillard for multiple games in this series. And in the other Eastern Conference series, the Boston Celtics made quick work of the Miami Heat without Jimmy Butler, and the Cleveland Cavaliers bested the Orlando Magic in what was likely one of the worst 7-game series of all time. Meanwhile, out west, the Thunder swept the Zion Williamson-less Pelicans team, and the Dallas Mavericks would take down the LA Clippers in 6 games after Kawhi Leonard's injury sidelined him for multiple games. And with that, we were down to 8 teams in the NBA playoffs. And while many considered the Celtics to be the Eastern Conference runaway favorite, the Western Conference was where all the eyes were, as the Thunder, Mavericks, Timberwolves, and Nuggets were all teams that could realistically make the NBA Finals. But it was truly the Timberwolves and Nuggets series that was on the main stage, as after the Timberwolves were arguably the Nuggets' toughest series in last season's playoffs, many were curious to see how Minnesota would fare after having a fully healthy core and top defense in this league. And after a series full of blowouts, yet captivating performances from the reigning MVP Nikola Jokic and rising superstar Anthony Edwards, the series would go to Game 7. But in Game 7, after the Nuggets held a 15-point lead going into halftime, it would be the Timberwolves who came back and stole this series in Denver, sending the reigning champs home in shocking fashion. And in the other series out west, the 1st-seeded Thunder would put up a great fight, but ultimately fall to the 5th-seeded Mavericks in 6 games, and set up a matchup against the Timberwolves. On the other side of the bracket, the 1st-seeded Celtics would once again cruise against the injury-ridden Cavaliers, and set up an Eastern Conference Finals matchup against the Indiana Pacers, who took down the depleted Knicks in 7 games after being down 3-2 in the series. Now we were down to 4 teams left in the NBA playoffs. In the Eastern Conference, it was the Boston Celtics who made quick work of the Indiana Pacers, making their way to the NBA Finals as one of few teams in NBA history to enter the finals at 20 losses or less for the entire season. Meanwhile, out west, another shock occurred when the heavily favored Timberwolves looked flat and got dominated by Dallas's much improved defense, which led to the Mavericks beating Minnesota in 5 games and punching their ticket to the franchise's first finals appearance in over a decade. So with that, the NBA Finals would be set as the Mavericks would take on the Celtics. And in a series defined by defensive effort and all-around teamwork, it would be the Boston Celtics who raised the Larry O'Brien for the first time since 2008, taking down the Mavericks in 5 games, with Jaylen Brown winning the Finals MVP. While this wasn't the most entertaining Finals series, or playoffs for that matter, the Celtics finally captured the title they had been looking for with this core for almost 6 years. And after a lackluster NBA draft that saw Zachary Vucevic get selected first overall, and a subsequently lackluster free agency that saw Paul George go to the 76ers and DeMar DeRozan go to the Sacramento Kings, the 2024 season was officially over, and now we wait for Olympic basketball and for the NBA to start up back again. And if you want to keep up to date with the upcoming season or all things related to the NBA, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, and make sure to comment down below your favorite moment from this season. So with that, thank you all for watching this video, and I'm Julian with Talkback Sports, and I'll see you next time.